So I know we're here at a cult conference and I'm very excited to be here, but I actually don't want to talk about cults. I want to talk about seekers. You might be wondering what I mean by seekers. And I think we would probably all consider ourselves seekers, but we'll get into it. Seeking is a natural human impulse. So much of our human existence is a mystery. And we've never stopped asking the big questions about why we're here and what all of this means. Seeking these answers is why we have cave drawings. It's why we have art and music and religion. It's why we have science. And on a smaller scale in our individual lives, many of us are motivated to make the most out of our time on Earth, to be our best selves and to live lives of meaning and purpose. And oh boy, there are so many resources out there to help us find that meaning and purpose. So many resources willing to offer us solutions, answers, products to meet the needs of seekers. So generally, we might call all of that stuff self-help, although part of the problem is that it's really difficult to put a box around all of this stuff. It's very diffuse. But the reason that I am here at a cult conference is because in the many years that I've been looking into the self-help industry, I am confronted again and again with the issue of cults, or at least culty stuff when it comes to self-help. To quote Mark Vicente, nobody joins a cult, they join a good thing. And if you're familiar with that quote, he goes on to say, they join a good thing and then they realize they were fucked. Sorry. But a lot of the times what they were looking for when they found the cult was self-help. What I've come to see is that when we look at the whole of these self-help, self-improvement, spiritual guidance, self-actualization resources, there's something of a continuum between the benign and maybe even genuinely helpful resources and what we would actually consider a cult. And finding that line, recognizing that line, it's very tricky. So many people today are talking about how we're finding ourselves in like a new golden age of cults. And I can't help but notice that this has coincided with an increased interest in self-help as well. And what's more is I can tell you that in the 13 years that I've been scrutinizing the self-help world, there's been a dramatic shift in just the last 3 years since the pandemic, shifting in so many ways, who is seeking, what they're seeking, and what they're finding. So that's why today we're here talking about the fine line between self-help and cults. So I just want to warn you as we get further into this topic, we will be making reference to some disturbing content, including manslaughter, sexual child abuse, and we also do provide some resources at the end. So we're all going to introduce ourselves in just a moment, but I want to just reference something quickly that I think kind of bonds the three of us. We actually just met for the first time this morning in person. I think we would all consider ourselves seekers. We're the types of people who, when confronting the challenges of life, we do the best that we can to find meaningful paths through those challenges. We've sought to be our best selves, to have a richer, spiritual, and fuller experience in our beautiful lives. I love the seekers, the philosophers, the dreamers, the creators. These are my people. My sister was a seeker. She lived an unconventional life. She sought out adventure and beauty, and she went for it. She imagined a big life that was unique to her, and she worked hard to bring this vision to reality. She was a work hard, play hard, live fully, love deeply kind of person. And her search eventually led her into the guidance of a self-help teacher named James Arthur Ray. He is an author in the best-selling self-help franchise, The Secret, and he was endorsed by Oprah. So as it turned out, he misrepresented his credentials and ran a criminally unsafe event, which included his appropriated version of a sweat lodge, in which Kirby and 2 other participants died and many others were injured. Kirby was 38 years old. After her death, my family began looking into what had happened, and we discovered this whole world of shady gurus, using manipulative, even culty tactics to amass their followings. We also watched as some people portrayed Kirby and the other victims as naive, weak, desperate, or gullible. But we knew Kirby. We knew who she was, and we knew that what had actually happened was that a dangerously unethical and manipulative charlatan had taken her best attributes, her desire to learn, her openness to new ideas, her work ethic, her determination, and used those things against her. In light of all that we learned, my family founded Seek Safely, a 501c3 nonprofit organization aimed at self-help consumer safety, in the hopes that by educating seekers and trying to bring about change to the industry, we can protect other people like Kirby in their seeking journeys. So I am the director of that organization. My name is Jean Brown. I also hold a master's degree in public policy. We have a podcast that I co-host, and my mother, Jenny Brown, and I also co-wrote a memoir about our experience of finding out what happened to Kirby, learning about the industry, dealing with our grief, and going through James Ray's criminal trial. So that's my story. I'll be talking more specifically about the self-help industry, but I will first like to let my co-presenters introduce themselves as well.
So my name is Callie Sorensen, and just like Kirby, I have lived a very unconventional life. Grew up in the Midwest with a really great kind of Ned Flanders type of Midwest family. And, you know, I went to college and I was like, there's got to be something more than just the 9-to-5 job, get married, 2.2 kids, white picket fence. And so I ended up traveling the world. And I went to South America, Central America, volunteered there, was in Korea, volunteering, and I joined the Peace Corps in Africa, teaching HIV/AIDS education to the deaf. And around my travels, I saw so much corruption, abuse. My principal was on the front page of the Kenya newspaper for raping one of my students. I walked in on teachers sexually abusing. And this really like lit a fire inside of me of, I got to find answers. I got to like, how do I solve this? And it led me into the world of spirituality and self-help. And so I traveled to India, I traveled to Nepal, I traveled all over seeking. And I just, whenever I go to a new country, I immerse myself. And in India and Nepal, there's, you know, that guru culture, this devotional worship. And I threw myself into that, not knowing that I was crossing the fine line into these culty communities. And I would call myself a professional cult hopper. I have been in over 30 different self-help and spiritual communities. When I was in John of God in Brazil, who was also endorsed by Oprah, one of my friends who I met there introduced me to Bentinho Massaro on YouTube. She sent me one of his videos and he kind of meshed the East versus the West and this empowerment, self-realization, this kind of create your own reality empowerment. And I went into the algorithmic black hole of watching video after video after video. And I ended up moving to Sedona and joining the Inner Circle. And I was with him for about 2 years, leading the retreats, traveling, working together with him. And at one of the retreats in Sedona, my dear friend Brent Wilkins committed suicide at the retreat. And you think that this would wake me up, but it actually drove me deeper into the cult. And that's when all these articles started to come up that we were a cult. And there was so much cognitive dissonance, which I'll talk about later, but it drove me deeper and deeper in. And it wasn't until I left that I didn't even know it was a cult, but I started to have the CPTSD symptoms. And I ended up for a year and a half. I was unfunctional, unable to even go to the grocery store, had to move back home with my parents, weighted blanket, blackout curtains, just shivering, shaking, bed sores for about a year and a half as I was processing, not even knowing. And somebody I talked to reached out to me and she told me that she too was suicidal and going through the same things. And I thought this was just because I was in the inner circle and so deep in it that this was happening to me. But she was completely online, only watching the videos on YouTube, and she was unfunctioning. And that lit an even deeper fire. So I became a whistleblower, was published in the Rolling Stone, started speaking out publicly on YouTube, my Instagram, and sharing this awareness of what was going on behind the scenes. And from that, I founded the Red Flag Education nonprofit 501c3. And now I raise awareness on social media to combat the social media of self-help cults. And I offer one-on-one support in groups for cult and narcissistic abuse recovery. trained in a number of different things. And currently I'm finishing my master's in the psychology of coercive control. And I'm writing my dissertation on the online cult phenomena and cult prevention.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Jennifer French Tomasic. I have a master's in the psychology of coercive control. I'm a cult and religious recovery specialist, so I work one-to-one with people and also provide group experiences. I'm a research associate as well, an expert witness for coercive control cases, and host of the Project Hope podcast. My pre-cult years. So I lived internationally, which were definitely formative years for me, had a huge impact on kind of shaping who I was to become. I was very, very close with my family. I started out of college with a career in home birth midwifery. I was in Boston at the time, and that's where I met my culty group. This is me and my fam. During the cult years, so I was 25 years old when I joined, 11 years in. It was a Christian mystical school, so based in New Testament teachings, Gnostic teachings, very Eastern, even in terms of rituals, but also Catholic rituals. And also both leaders that you see there on the right were trained psychologists. It was a student teacher model, again, kind of a red flag. So I took a vow of obedience to my teachers. And it was an all-consuming schedule and lifestyle. I spent 8 years not speaking to my family, and that was the biggest impact for me. Anybody who would have known us absolutely would have been shocked that that would have happened. I had an arranged marriage that you see in the middle picture through the group and became an ordained priest. My story of how I got in and how I got out can be found in the podcast that I host called Project Hope that I created for families and friends with a loved one in a cult. Oh, and in season 2, I began with an interview with my brother so that people could sort of understand also from the family perspective. All right, and now we'll get into the real content.
So as I said, defining self-help is really difficult. It's kind of ideally, you would say self-help is using your own tools, resources, abilities, and efforts to achieve your goal. But what we're really talking about when we are talking about self-help is the whole industry that's selling tools and resources to help people achieve their goals. As I said, very difficult to define, difficult to quantify. There's not a lot of research about the self-help industry. There's a bit, and we'll get into that, but it's, there's not enough, essentially. It encompasses everything from wellness and fitness, personal and professional development, new age and spiritual guidance, coaching, and then even multi-level marketing companies we might put into the bucket of self-help. So yeah, I kind of call it a catch-all industry. One of the hallmarks is that it positions itself as an alternative to more mainstream sources, especially where those resources are seen to have failed us. So for example, organized religion, modern psychology, Western medicine, public education, self-help is like all of these things have failed us in many ways. And there are some valid criticisms in there, but they're, saying they're providing the alternative. There are many different access points depending on your interests. So whether you're into fitness or you're into spirituality, there's a guru for that. Even across these different fields, there are a lot of recurring themes. So again, that emphasis on providing an alternative to mainstream resources. Also, you see lots of recurring ideas like the law of attraction kind of just keeps popping up. It kind of becomes like, I know it when I see it sort of thing. But again, one of the big hallmarks is that it lacks professional organization and regulation. There's pretty much nothing there that's regulating this industry, in part because it's so hard to define. So Michael Langone defines a cult as a group or movement exhibiting a great or excessive devotion or dedication to some person, idea, or thing, and employing unethically manipulative techniques of persuasion and control designed to advance the goals of the group's leader. to the actual or possible detriment of members, their families, or the community. So this is where we get into the fine line. How do you tell the difference between self-help and a cult? So not all self-help organizations are cults. It's important to start out with that, but we often see the unethical self-help providers using very culty tactics to influence their followers. In some organizations, the inner circle might come to resemble something that is very much like a cult, whereas the wider organization wouldn't necessarily qualify as a cult. Another crossover is that many cults define themselves as self-help or professional development organizations as their kind of front. We saw that for sure with Nexium. And then the other thing that happens is sometimes groups and teachers start out with completely good intentions, and then over time, for whatever reasons, they cross over into that cult space. So the self-help industry, again, trying to define it, very difficult. So it is an $11 billion a year industry in the US alone. Globally, that market is like $42 billion a year. It's projected to keep growing to about $15 billion a year in the US by 2025. These numbers come from pretty much the only market research that exists on the self-help industry. The boomer generation is the largest consumer group, but it's quickly shifting over to millennials as they become a bigger spending demographic. Usually the number that we see in terms of male-female breakdown is that 60 to 70% of the self-help consumers are women. I kind of get the sense that that is actually shifting, although there's just no data to support that. It's just sort of a hunch that I have. So we're talking about everything from books to in-person speaking or retreat style events, apps, podcasts, coaching services, webinars, and online courses. Ebooks are also becoming a huge segment as well. So yeah, it's shifting away from these physical offerings and going more into the online and virtual offerings. Who are seekers? Usually seekers are people in moments of transition. So young adulthood, people who are going through some sort of change, like a divorce or a career change, even new parents. It's also people looking to kind of get to the next level in their professional life, in their personal life. People who need mental health resources and would really benefit from traditional mental health resources, but who for whatever reason, they cannot access these resources. Sometimes it's stigma, a lot of times it's money. People in recovery. But as I said, all of us, really, seeking is in our nature. So there are times in our lives, I think, when many of us find ourselves on a seeking path. Dr. Christine Whalen is a self-help researcher, pretty much one of the only ones, and she is a board member of Seek Safely. She says the data over the last couple of decades is that the vast majority of Americans have purchased some sort of self-help product, whether it's a book, advice magazines, an online seminar, or a course. So there's this kind of stigma of this self-help section in the bookstore or whatever, but the reality is that most of us are consuming this stuff in one way or another. So that brings us to this question, are seekers weak? So again, as I talked about my sister, we knew that that wasn't the case after we realized what happened to her. I think a more useful term than weak would be something more like vulnerability. So again, as we find ourselves in these moments of transition in our lives, it makes us vulnerable. Vulnerable isn't a weakness. Vulnerability is a state that we can all find ourselves in. And in fact, a lot of times self-help is encouraging people to be vulnerable so that they can change and shift, which is, a bit of a problem, a bit of a conflict of interest. But Callie is going to get more into that kind of psychology of the seeker and what's happening with that whole relationship.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the benefits and risks of the self-help world. Because again, with everything, there's positive sides and there's negative sides. And I know as soon as I got out of self-help, I was like, screw all of it. I don't want anything to do with self-help. But after I healed, I was like, okay, there are benefits and there are risks. So I think it's really important that we look at both of these sides. Now, the obvious and kind of what Jean touched on was that there's personal growth. It's room for self-improvement. We can maybe seek self-help to learn how to have a better quality of life in all different areas, in our relationships, in our career, in our finances, and like to learn about spirituality, self-expression, our confidence, our self-esteem. And it can help us learn, grow, and evolve, setting practical goals, taking actions towards those goals, and finding solutions to life's challenges. Another benefit of self-help is it can help us not reinvent the wheel. We can learn from other people's mistakes, learn from the wisdom of their successes, and not repeat those same mistakes. Another benefit is, especially when we look at the online world, if you know, Cooper has this AAA engine. And so there's a lot of benefits now that this self-help is available online. There's the accessibility, right? You can get it on your fingertips, on your phone, on YouTube, on podcasts, on blogs. It's affordable. A lot of these platforms are free, or you can get an ebook for a few dollars these days. And it's anonymous. Instead of having to come to this conference and show your face, you can stay at home under your covers and stay anonymous. And self-help really differs from therapy in these ways of, like, for example, with my therapist, I don't know who their other clients are. So we can't build a community if we're kind of talking about the same things. But when you enter into a self-help world, you can build this sense of community, people who are interested in similar topics and are going through maybe similar experiences. Also, some of the self-help groups can create positive social impact. And you can kind of get a sense of those personal stories and relatability, maybe like the cult conference, you hear stories and you're like relating to us as well. And from these stories, we're social creatures. So it gives us motivation, inspiration. It can spring up this hope and positivity. And looking at Bandura's social learning theory, this is how we learn. We learn by observing other people, by seeing how leaders or authors have overcome adversity, how they've achieved success, and maybe we become inspired to emulate these behaviors. So if there's so many benefits to self-help, again, why do people avoid it? And there's so much stigma with self-help, and same with therapy, right? We're seen as maybe like, I was afraid to go because it's like, I don't want to be seen as weak or incapable of coping, or feeling like something is wrong with me, or I should be stronger with this, especially in independent places like the US. We have this kind of independent mindset. I should be able to do it alone. I don't need others. Or there's can be these spiritual ideas, such as God will heal everything. Just go to God or just pray. You don't need to, seek help from outsiders. Or in the new age, you're perfect just the way you are. You don't need to reach your highest potential. Just stay where you are. So I think it's really important that we remove the shame of seeking self-help, because it can be beneficial and it can help us develop a deeper self-awareness to get to know ourselves on deeper levels. And it can also provide comfort, guidance, and hope during challenging times. However, there comes a risk because, again, like Jean said, when you are going through these challenging times, such as emotional distress, whether you be going through anxiety, depression, maybe you have going through a divorce or a breakup, you lost your job, or you're going through a huge transition, these groups and coercive groups can target these vulnerabilities. And they know that we're vulnerable during these times and maybe more susceptible. So they can speak to that suffering, your pain points, and when I get new clients, they're kind of like, yeah, they were talking directly to me, right? Because they know the psychology, they know what your pain is. They also know that your dreams, your desires, your wishes, and they speak to that. So how can we know if a self-help group crosses the fine line of culty? So I think it's really important that we look at the context and the spectrum. So it's not just black and white. It really depends on the leader and the group. And you can look at Hassan's influence continuum. It goes from healthy to destructive, from constructive to destructive. There's a huge wide range of the spectrum. And I think when we look at the self-help group, it's quite susceptible because, and when we cross the fine line of culty, there's that charismatic leader on stage and their devoted followers who are listening to every word, buying every single book and retreat, this extreme loyalty and devotion, trusting them with their lives. This is what it was with Bentini. It was like he had all of the answers. And it was this unquestioning commitment without any kind of doubt or questioning him. And when we look at the fine line of culty, I think this really happens when we start to hyper focus on one person, right? That one person has all of the answers, and it can create this superiority and this dependency. And it really like lacks the exposure. It kind of closes the doors from this openness to be able to learn from diverse viewpoints and experiences. And it can cut down our critical thinking of what are the other perspectives? What are the other leaders and thought thinkers like thinking and saying? And what are the disagreements to my leader, and why? Why is there this criticism or these disagreements? And it's not only with the leader or the person, the hyper focus. It can also be that hyper focus on the tool, on the modality, on the framework, on the technique of this is my life, and these tools can be very helpful, but it's like a complement to your life instead of it is my whole life. Like with from Bentino, we had this tool that was like drop everything for 2 to 5 seconds into the nothingness awareness of everything that was. And that's okay when you're going through a hard thing to drop that thought and drop those negative thinking. But however, it became an emotion and thought stopping technique that then started to control us. And it becomes, again, that unhealthy when it's the sole focus. Now, the risk of self-help leaders, there's a lot of stigma around this because sometimes these leaders can have this oversimplification or black and white thinking. So that might be they don't fully understand the complexities of life. They don't understand the complexities of every single human being, how we're so unique and at different stages of our journey. And maybe they're just speaking to their own experience, and they don't realize that what worked for me might not work for you. Also, another risk is, especially this is how I got drawn, is they speak with such confidence, conviction, and they have all the right logical words to say that I couldn't argue with. And I was like, well, they must know what they're talking about, right? But they might be talking the talk, but the question is, are they walking the walk? So we can't just look at the language and the logical right words that they're saying. We need to look underneath. How are their behaviors? How are their actions? What are the results of the followers that are following them? And maybe, they might have a lack of experience, education, credentials, exposure to other perspectives, or what I've found, lacking true deep empathy, that true deep compassion and deep care for another person. There also can be an overemphasis on work and material wealth or financial exploitation, where they start treating their followers or their clients as numbers or dollar signs instead of truly caring about them. And that value is more in their work in comparison to transformational results. Now, some of the risks for self-help seekers, and this definitely happened to me when I was in these groups, was giving away my personal power, where I kind of lost my sense of self. I couldn't make decisions on my own and thinking that they knew better than me, again, putting them on a pedestal and wanting to have somebody else have the answers for me. And I want to say too, that this is understandable in this world where there's so much challenges, there's so much turmoil, there's so much in the news, there's a lot of heavy energies, and it's hard to think for ourselves. There's so much psychology of how our brain works. It's hard to access the neocortex, the logical part of our brain. So of course, it's understandable why we want somebody else to give us these answers, but it's a huge risk. Also, another risk is wanting that easy recipe, that easy formula and step-by-step process for success, because our brain is wired that we want that certainty. We're trying to survive and we want the secret tool, that we want that golden ticket or the magic pill. And another important point that I came across too as a seeker is I didn't understand trauma and how important it is that that leader or that group understands trauma in a deep, deep way, because it can be re-traumatizing. They can invalidate your experiences, your emotions, your feelings, and that's what I felt in these groups. Like, I was like, well, nothing works for me. And I was like, oh, wait, they just, now looking back, I'm like, oh, they didn't understand trauma. No one knew that that's what I was going through. Another risk for the seekers is this temptation of seeking short-term emotional feel-good highs. So it was like addicted to consuming that motivational content, going on the YouTube channel and binging that all the time, or seeking and going to the next retreat, getting high, right? And then after the retreat, I'd feel great at the retreat, go home, and what would happen? Crash. I'd be suicidal. I'd be depressed. I'd be anxious. What's wrong with me? Binge, right? It's getting that next high like a drug. And trying to get all of our needs met by the leader and the group, and believing that that group or that one person can meet all of my needs. And I think it's really important to bring in, you've probably seen this, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's to know that it's a natural part of our growth. Like Jean said, it was like, we are seekers. We're always, it's just a natural part of our evolution as a human being. But at the base of the pyramid is meeting our, physical survival needs, getting that roof over our head, food in our belly, and then we seek that safety and survival. And then we move up the pyramid into the more of the self-help and seeking a higher potential. So I also want to say, if you're listening to this and you're like, maybe I should seek self-help, but I don't want to, maybe you're just at the base and you like, that's good. Focus on the base, get your safety, security, your base set. And that's what I didn't do. And I jumped way to the top. And that's what really was destructive for me. And, but after you start to get these base needs of the pyramid met, we step into what I call the universal human fulfillment needs. And I think as a society, there's a huge stigma around the word need, because it's like, well, I don't want to be needy, and maybe my needs don't matter. That's what I was taught in the cult. And because a lot of the world, we are focused on surviving. But after we meet our survival needs, there's a natural flow into, I want to be a fulfilled whole person. I want to move into that fulfillment, into thriving. So to be a fulfilled human being, we need to meet these fulfillment needs. These are our psychological needs, our emotional needs, and it's just as important not only to meet our physical needs, but to meet our psychological and our emotional needs in order to feel whole within ourselves. And these are universal. I've lived in over 30 countries. It's like, no matter where I go, it's amazing. No matter how different the countries and the cultures are, these base needs are the same across the board. Maybe at different times of your life, different needs are at the forefront and other ones aren't as forward, but it's our human driver. It drives our experience, our actions. Any action that you take is meeting a need. So for example, coming to this cult conference, what was the need that made you come here? Maybe you were looking for growth or learning or intellectual stimulation or connection and meeting other cult survivors, right? And needs also work in duality. So it's not as simple as black and white, right? Because it's like, okay, I need consistency, but then it's like, if I have too much consistency, I get bored and I need spontaneity. I need adventure, and if I have too much adventure, okay, wait, no, I need more consistency in my life. So these also change throughout our life and day to day. And I think alongside needs, we need to look at our feelings, because feelings express what our underlying needs, whether our underlying needs are met or unmet. So when you have positive feelings, that's when your needs are met, but when you have negative feelings, that's when the needs are unmet. So for example, if you're angry and upset, maybe you're not being heard, maybe you're not being seen, but when our needs are met, we don't experience these negative feelings. So needs are so important to live that fulfilled life. Now, feelings and needs in relationship to cultic communities, coercive groups target people's feelings and needs. So for example, Bentinho targeted what he called wanderers or the star seeds or light workers and things like that. People who felt, like they have a bigger purpose, but they're feeling kind of lost or disconnected, like they're the black sheep. So he would target that and speak to that disconnect and offer them connection, offer them purpose, offer them fulfillment. And why do people join cults? It's because of needs, right? I was looking for a purpose. I was looking for that connection, for intellectual stimulation, to learn, to grow. And why do we leave cults? Because our needs are not being met, or we have other needs and we're trying to get them outside. So I feel really what's important is to understand what your feelings and needs are. And I have a feelings and needs list. So if you want to email me or contact me, I can send it to you. But the true empowerment comes when we can become aware of your feelings and needs. What are your feelings that you're having and why? Looking deeper, right? If you're in a group or you're maybe venturing out into the world again after a cult and afraid to join a new group, it's like, how are you feeling within that group? Right? And what are your needs? Are your needs being met in that group? And understand what your needs are and really speak up for them. And this can be the hardest thing. And what I work with my clients for, it can feel almost terrifying. Like it's almost like I'm going to die if I speak my needs. This is how much they've been kind of unseen and unspoken to. So really speak up for what you feel and need. And it can feel scary as hell. And also learn what are the various other ways that I can have these needs met so that you don't become so dependent on your partner or so dependent on that leader, so dependent on that self-help group to solve every single need. It's like, okay, if I have a need for connection, maybe I find other avenues as well to supplement that so I'm not so honed in on one group or one leader. And now Jennifer is going to talk about the online tactics and principles of influence and group dynamics.
All right. So many of you are likely very familiar with how the internet, social media, and marketing function. but I thought that if you aren't, I'd mention a few things that could be helpful. I'd also like to recommend an excellent film that was released in 2020 called The Social Dilemma, a documentary whose tagline is, "The technology that connects us also controls us, manipulates us, and divides us." So let's address a few fundamentals that help us understand the,
Big one.
So let's address a few fundamentals that help us understand the online world. SEO, or search engine optimization, is the process used to optimize a website's content relevance and link popularity, so its pages can become easily findable and sync with people's interests. The goal is that the website is found by search engines when people are looking for relevant content. This is also used on social media platforms. An excellent example we know about that certainly would fit into the self-help / spiritual realm of culty groups is the case of Teal Swan. She's grown an incredible following with her YouTube videos and social media presence. Her Teal tribe consists of thousands of millennial followers. These are also individuals who were targeted by her SEO when they Googled about being suicidal. Without going into details of the case, you can watch The Deep End. This hasn't ended well for some. I also wanted to mention something similar with Facebook ads. These are ads that individuals or companies can pay for that target one's age, interests, locations, and really life situations. So for example, a recently widowed woman or a young woman seeking love can be targeted by the Twin Flames universe, whose leaders teach that they can help you find not just your soulmate, but the one twin flame out there, the perfect person for you. Similar to other concepts I'll be addressing today, you'll see that these tools can be used with positive intent to help someone or nefarious intent to get money, fame, power. I'm not saying there's anything fundamentally wrong with targeting your audience, but especially when it's around medicine, health, and wellness, you can imagine how the vulnerabilities and risks might hold more weight. How much would you pay to solve for a serious medical or psychological burden? Attempting to manipulate an algorithm in order to gain attention is one of the blatantly manipulative tactics. This can raise content into a platform's trending topic, spreading it to other users or elevating it to the coveted first page of Google. We now have a well-researched example of this, as was discovered and reported in the LA Times on July 19th, 2022, when the trial of Amber Heard and Johnny Depp was trending as a topic of interest. If you were at all on social media around this event, you likely saw a ton of pro-Johnny content and a lot of Amber hate. It's now been discovered that these seemingly organic comments of negativity were in fact manipulated and influenced. Bot Centennial, a research firm that uses data science and artificial intelligence to detect and track bots, trolls, and suspect accounts on Twitter and elsewhere, focused on how Heard was treated during the civil trial. It found that the targeting of the actor was, quote, one of the worst cases of platform manipulation and flagrant abuse from a group of Twitter accounts, end quote. One manipulative technique that was employed was copy-pasta, or copying and pasting duplicative content to game Twitter's trends and propagate a positive view of Depp and a negative view of Heard, the report said. One such message read, quote, so this is what was copied and pasted: people turned against Amber Heard not because Johnny Depp is a powerful man or a famous actor, but because we watched the trial and saw who was telling the truth and who wasn't. It's a pretty convincing comment there. Additionally, the company said it found that women who tweeted in support of Heard were often targeted by trolls who flung vulgar and threatening language, that's the quote, their way for weeks after the trial ended. Another technique that's easy to employ is inflating numbers. This is when you buy followers on social media, and we'll get into discussing that a little later on why it matters. The sales funnel, it's all about marketing. I'll guide you through a deeper dive into online marketing tactics, but the point here is that we needn't forget that in the privacy of our own home, our own computer, and our own accounts, we are being sold to in an intimate environment. These accounts are sculpted. I know it sounds basic, but we do forget. Images are powerful. It's important to consider what we assume when we view social media accounts. It's really acceptable to sell online, and with the normalization of that, we can miss that it's sculpted. We can target online audiences and have a huge reach. This magnifies with shares and like-minded followers. We seek to be with others of like mind, and we want others to reinforce our beliefs. This happens online, as we see when thousands of people believe in a conspiracy theory. This leads nicely into our next slide, a quote provided by a research center called the Center for Digital Study. What makes an online cult even more dangerous than a normal cult is how their ideology is no longer bounded by geographical borders. Ideologies that were once landlocked are now free to roam with the spread of online information. Online-specific confirmation bias. A confirmation bias is when we look for information that supports our pre-existing opinion. We start with a view of a particular issue and then search for information that upholds that view. Although it's a bias, it's not usually intentional, meaning it's a type of implicit bias. It's a natural tendency of the way people think to rely on shortcuts in our mental processing. It's just easier to do than subjecting our views to contradictory information, which of course is discomforting. We might yield to the confirmation bias when reading about politics, encountering people of particular demographic profiles, or selecting articles to read. So selective search, this type of confirmation bias explains people's search for evidence in a one-sided way to support their hypotheses or theories. An example is, simply put, if on Google you were to search with a bias, you get a biased result. Selective interpretation. This type of bias explains that people interpret evidence concerning their existing beliefs by evaluating confirming evidence differently than evidence that challenges their preconceptions. Various experiments have shown that people tend to not change their beliefs on complex issues even after being provided with research because of the way they interpret the evidence. Additionally, people accept confirming evidence more easily and critically evaluate the disconfirming evidence, which is also known as disconfirmation bias. When provided with the same evidence, people's interpretations could still be biased. Selective recall and memory bias. To confirm their current beliefs, people may remember or recall information selectively. Psychological theories vary in defining memory bias, but some theories state that information confirming prior beliefs is stored in the memory, while contradictory evidence is not. That's schema theory. Some others claim that striking information is remembered best. That's called a humor effect. And algorithms, of course, reinforce these normal psychological functions. So what we search for also becomes normalized with reinforcement. Okay, Robert Cialdini published his book, Influence and the Psychology of Persuasion, in 1984. In it, he explores factors that affect the decisions that people make, particularly in relation to sales and purchasing. Now, almost 4 decades after the book's publication, its principles are adapted to the internet and marketing, especially in the business of conversion rates. So the moment the user takes the desired action online, like clicking a purchase button. All these principles can be done ethically or unethically. So that may be something to pay attention to as you listen to these. The principle of reciprocity. This is give a little something to get a little something in return. People by nature feel obliged to provide discounts or concessions to others if they've received favors from those same people. An easy example of this is downloading a document of valuable information in exchange for your email. Also, simply important to remember, as the more you listen to someone, so giving time, like in a Facebook Live that you attend, the more likely you are to buy. Scarcity. When you believe something's in short supply, you want it more. Scarcity is the perception that products are more attractive when their availability is limited. We're likelier to purchase something if we're informed that it's the last one or a special deal that will expire soon. We've all seen this experience today, only 45% off or only 2 left. Also, we are likelier to purchase something if we're informed that, that this is actually part of our normal and natural psychology to hate to miss out. So we have an acronym, right? FOMO. And that fear is a powerful motivator to encourage us to act quickly. So there's also time-limited scarcity. This is a great one. An example of this principle is a blurb that reads, offer ends in X amount of time with a countdown. And when this has been studied, results find that purchases do increase. So having a shot clock there as you purchase actually increases sales. Authority. Have you ever wondered why we have a tendency to obey authority figures, even if they're objectionable, and ask others to commit objectionable acts? It's human nature, actually. Okay, so accessories like job titles, so having a doctor before a name, uniforms, infuse an air of authority, making the average person more likely to accept what that person says. This is where we think about that line of ethics or use of this for good or to manipulate. It's important to note here that gurus use this with displays of confidence, conviction, and charisma versus titles, unless they have that. And sometimes these might look like titles that hold a societal or communal understanding, but there's no vetting or accountability, so no one the person actually answers to. This is one perhaps where that fine line could be difficult to detect. So I recommend also thinking about the law here. If the law is being broken, don't listen to the words and justifications, but rather get curious, enlist your critical thinking. So this is a very powerful part of influence, this authority element. And I think it's worth mentioning in the spiritual context, because the influence can be great, and therefore the repercussions in these environments that promise healing, wellness, and self-improvement can be devastating and long-term. Authority is at play in sexual abuse scandals, in unhealthy spiritual or church environments, because congregants believe their pastors, and people who report the sexual abuse of a child, for example, trust the pastor's authority, bring it to them, and then take the guidance of the pastor, trusting they will deal with it appropriately and never report the case to law enforcement. And we know that pedophiles tend to be repeat offenders. These pastors are using their authority to protect perpetrators and leave their entire congregation at risk, because that abuse will happen again. Recently, we have documentaries that reveal the examples of sexual violations that are rampant. So we've got Hillsong, we've got Shiny Happy People with the Gothard teachings and the Duggars at the center of that. Those teachings, actually, those Gothard teachings is obedience to authority. That's part of their teachings. We know that sexual abuse has gone unreported in the Catholic Church, the Baptist Church reports, and the fundamentalist communities. There are big reports about all these things. These are very serious repercussions. With this influence of authority, we're actively allowing the harm of typically women, girls, and young boys that will leave them grappling with this injustice for a lifetime. Online, we have great recent examples of the power this authority can hold. One is Liana Shanti. So I want to give a shout out to a little bit Culty's podcast interview with Jennings Brown. He's an investigative reporter that broke the Teal Swan case, plus some other things. And she is not even visible to her online followers. She presents a facade and has a, what's it called, like an avatar. And yet she has managed to convince wives that their husbands are harming their children, propelling some to divorce and move to Florida with their kids. I think Jennings Brown reported in that podcast about 37 cases he has reported, documented. So online or in real life, we see the use of celebrity to provide authority, as we saw with Oprah and James Arthur Ray, or John of God, as Callie mentioned. Commitment and consistency. People want their beliefs to be consistent with their values. This is the principle that humans have a deep need to be seen as consistent. This means, for example, that once we've publicly committed to something or someone, we're much more likely to go through and deliver on that commitment, hence the consistency. From a psychological perspective, this can be explained by the fact that we align commitment with self-image. By getting site visitors to commit to something relatively small and usually free, like a guide or a white paper, they increase the likelihood that those site visitors will eventually see themselves as customers. That change in self-perception makes it easier to follow up with an offer for a paid product or service. So somebody offers a free masterclass with a hard sell on the last page to buy something big. I'm sure many of us have had that experience. Liking. The more you like someone, the more you'll be persuaded by them. Liking is based on sharing something similar or something more superficial, like physical attractiveness. I think this one is interesting to consider as we experience a world of filters. And if we marry that with the online wellness industry or workout weight loss messaging. So while this sounds basic, it really is persuasive. For example, you have a friend who follows some cool women that they like on social media. She admires them as business entrepreneurs who are also raising children. She engages, she loves it when they respond. She talks about them, watches what they're doing to live an amazing, magical life while making money and being a mom. So when they begin selling a pseudoscience healthcare product, she buys in. Now she's in an MLM while holding multiple legit degrees in healthcare, selling pseudoscience, and putting her trust in the idea that she can support her family with this. And I don't mean to whittle things down to an ultra simplistic perspective here. As we'll mention many times, humans are complex. Situations and considerations are layered. So for example, in this case, this next principle may be at play as well. There's nothing like feeling validated based on what others are doing. Cialdini defines social proof as people doing what they observe other people doing. It's basically safety in numbers. Back to the online example of a pseudoscience healthcare product. So the individual who is bought in as a part of the MLM will share their personal experience and rave about the product. It seems to work for everything. Everyone is encouraged to share these testimonials, and algorithms sync you with others mentioning the product as well. Now we're able to see that this friend likely decided to buy into the decision to sell the product after she had seen many others sharing their testimonials, which provided social proof, and that's all she needed. Even when questioned about the science, the social proof and likability dissuades her from getting to the bottom of how and why the product actually works. Even though she's a licensed medical provider, even though this is a large part of her business plan to single-handedly support her family. We're even more influenced by this principle if we're unsure of ourselves, the people we observe seem similar to us, And social psychology, of course, is rife with experiments that illustrate this unavoidable human phenomenon. Interestingly enough, Cialdini added this last principle after the first 6. So we're more easily influenced by someone with whom we experience a feeling of shared unity. Cialdini believes family ties are the strongest form of unity, but there are countless others, including background, age, nationality, or shared norms and values like a hobby. So an example of this might be a feeling of shared unity with other new moms. A new mom who runs her own acupuncture business, does an online promo, and gives away a gift to other moms that's organic baby butt balm for a new babe. This gift feels even more special than if she were to say, get free information from the mom about how to support yourself in the postpartum phase. She is more connected to the product because it connects her to her baby. Online tactics and group influence. So the importance of group influence is that it pushes people to positive as well as negative actions. It is what gives us guidelines for morality and ethics, inspires us to stand up for what is right, and accelerates progress and human improvement. The power of it lies partly in conformity. Changing one's attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors to match or imitate those of real or imagined others. So the first is informational influence, and this is when we conform to others because we believe they have accurate info. Normative influence is when we conform to others because we want them to like or accept us. And of course, I do recommend, if you haven't come across these studies, the Solomon Asch conformity experiment or Milgram's shock study, definitely check those out. Groupthink. Groupthink is a phenomenon that occurs when a group of well-intentioned people make irrational or non-optimal decisions due to the urge to conform or the belief that dissent is impossible. The problematic or premature consensus that is characteristic of groupthink may be fueled by a particular agenda, or it may be due to group members valuing harmony and coherence above critical thinking. What increases the risk that groupthink takes place? Groups that prioritize their group identity and behave coldly toward outsiders may be more likely to fall victim to groupthink. Sound familiar? Organizations in which dissent is discouraged or openly punished are similarly likely to engage in groupthink when making decisions. High stress is another root cause, as is time pressure that demands a fast action or decision. So we may think that this doesn't sound like a big deal, but I'm drawn to think of a social media clip that I recently posted of an interview conducted with a New Zealand journalist, Anka Richter. She shares how she spoke with one woman who had been part of the neo-tantric cult Agama. Some of you may be familiar with it, located in Thailand, and how the groupthink desensitized individuals to pay attention to what they wanted and how they were feeling, such that many women were sexually abused. When women questioned or dissented from wanting sexual penetration, this was turned on them as their issue. So in this case, we have an identification with a desire for sexual liberation. Dissent is punishable, as you will be seen as inferior, not spiritual, not in tune enough, etc. In this environment, practices took place where individuals were not informed that there would be an orgy at the end of the day. So time pressure and likely stress. Again, I'm not describing the full extent of these dynamics, but this is groupthink at play. So very powerful and serious repercussions. And now to Jean for more on the new self-help landscape.
Yeah. It's more important than ever that we understand how these principles operate to influence us, because as I mentioned at the beginning, things are rapidly changing in the self-help world. Social media is a game changer. The path to becoming a self-help guru has really changed. It used to be that you needed to write a book, get on the New York Times bestseller list, get on Oprah, and then you're set. And that has really changed. Now you can just buy a bunch of followers on Instagram and call yourself a guru. As a result of this, there are fewer big name gurus. You know, we all know Tony Robbins, Deepak Chopra, the big guys. Now there's a much broader range of influencers. A lot of them have smaller audiences, but they're no less impactful for those audiences. As we mentioned as well, the quote that was shared earlier, the geographic barriers no longer apply. You don't need to see these people in person to be influenced by them. Social media also favors tech-savvy individuals. So again, all those principles, the use of SEO, buying followers, all of that kind of stuff. If you're good at doing these things, you can become a guru. So then it becomes a question of, is this person, do they have actually good information to share? Is this person enlightened, or are they just good at marketing? It's hard to know the difference. And then as we talked about with algorithms as well, another aspect of algorithms is that they favor controversial content. As a result of that, I think we're seeing self-help becoming more politicized. It's a kind of a chicken or the egg question. Is it becoming more politicized because society is a little more polarized as well, or it's hard to tell what's going on, but it definitely seems to be happening that you're seeing political ideologies filter into the self-help world as well. And COVID really changed the industry. So people were experiencing heightened stress, anxiety, depression, social isolation. People were forced to turn online for all kinds of things to meet all kinds of needs, including fitness, community and connection, getting advice, or mental health services. Our whole lives were online for a while there. People made big life changes. Can I get a show of hands? How many people moved during the pandemic? How many people may have changed jobs or had a career change? So again, when we talk about that issue of vulnerability, the pandemic made us all vulnerable. And it really shifted, it accelerated this shift from online, from in-person offerings and physical offerings to online and virtual offerings, and this rise of the self-help influencer. And we also saw a real authority void during the pandemic. So we saw traditional sources of authority and information coming under further question. People were losing faith in government, in medical experts, in the media. This was happening a bit before the pandemic, but I think, again, it really accelerated this shift. And who is going to step in? Well, the self-help industry has always positioned itself as an alternative to these traditional sources of authority. So the self-help industry was more than ready to step into this void of authority. Actually, prior to our presentation, we had already gotten a question. I forgot to take my phone, but the question was about, there we go, thank you. What can be done or is being done legally to prevent people from counseling or life coaching without any ethical or educational background? In my experience, these people do a lot of harm and charge people exorbitant prices too. So this is part of the problem. There is very little being done. For coaching specifically, there are some things. There's the International Coaching Federation, ICF. They actually have some ethical standards. They do trainings. They require retraining over time, but anybody can still call themselves a coach. You don't have to go through the ICF to call yourself a coach. So Seek Safely, my organization, we actually are trying to push some legislation in New York State, specifically where we're based. It's pending. It's been pending for years, and it's gone through lots of iterations. The wheel of how government works, it's very slow. But this is part of the problem. There is no legislation. We've been talking about this for years. Finally, we feel like other people are talking about this with us as well. But at this moment in time, there's very little to protect people who are looking for self-help, who are looking for a coach. So at the moment, the focus is really on consumer education, educating consumers to protect themselves, because there's no one else that's protecting you when you're doing this. So that is why Callie is now going to talk about the red flags and green flags for seeking. And that's the kind of stuff that consumers need.
So now, how do we navigate the self-help space? And this also applies to any relationships too, not just self-help, but we're going to look at the red flags and green flags. So what exactly are red flags and green flags? The red flags are those warning signs that there could be coercive tactics going on. It could be crossing that fine line of culty or deception. Green flags are more of the positive indicator that it could be beneficial, respectful, or ethical practices. I'm also going to break this down further. I think it's really important to break it down into external flags and internal flags. So the external flags is when we're looking at the group, we're looking outside at the leader, how they're doing it. And internal flags is where we don't have to know what's going on behind the scenes, but we can go into ourselves and check within ourselves. And sometimes people come to me and they're like, well, how many flags need to be present? I'm like, it depends on context, because sometimes they can paint those red flags green and it looks like a green flag. And maybe there's only one red flag that you can recognize, but it is massive. So first, we're going to look at the external red flags at the leader in the group. And some of these overlap. It's kind of like a summary of what we've already talked about. So again, that quick, easy fix or the magical solutions. So if they start saying success in 3 easy steps, heal your anxiety in this 4-week program, or make 10K months by joining this Facebook group, or offering any kind of magical pill, red flag. It's not that easy. I wish it was. Another one is if they have the answer, the solution, and no one else can help you, big red flag. Also, if they offer a one-size-fits-all approach or a solution, and there's no acknowledgement of the complexities and the individual differences. And again, all the clients that I see, it's like what works for one client is not going to work for another one, like necessarily. So we need to take into consideration that all of us are very, very different. Another external red flag is when they are secretive about their method. It's special, secret, or mystical knowledge that nobody else can get. And they're not going to explain it to you because you just won't get it. You're not high vibe enough. You're just not going to understand. Also, this also leads into that us versus them mentality, that superiority. We are higher, more awakened, more conscious. Bentini would call it the higher density service to others beings, and others are service to self. They are lower, inferior, worse, unconscious, wrong, evil. Also disregard for outside help. They look down on professionals. They don't even want to look at, outside therapists or science or research or education. Or they talk down on those who leave. For those of you who know Scientology, they label them suppressive people. They're shaming, they're shunning, and they fail because they just weren't cut out for it, right? Or something bad is going to happen now that they leave. They can also instill fear in their followers, and it can be as simple as like something like you're just not going to succeed, or just kind of coercively doing that of the fear. Or it can be something like with Bentinho, he used negative entity attacks. So I had a negative entity implanted into my brain. Other external red flags is when they avoid criticism or deeper questioning. Now, this one can be confusing because, for example, they might say, yes, I'm open to questioning, but they kind of go roundabout ways, or they don't answer it, or they're not truly, truly open to that deeper questioning. And they can also, another red flag, that lack of personal responsibility and accountability. When they don't admit their mistakes, when they pretty much pretend like they're not a human being, or they say all of your failures are your fault, but all of your successes are because of me and my group, right? And also, if you have not this could be a whole nother lecture on narcissism, but look up, if you haven't already researched, look up narcissism, especially covert narcissism as well. Any of these kinds of grandiosity, sense of entitlement, the boundary violations, any of those narcissistic traits, I would recommend researching that and looking that up. Big red flags. Another red flag is when there are multiple negative reviews or formal complaints or former members starting to speak out. This can be a red flag. Now we're going to shift into internal red flags. So again, this is how you feel when interacting with the leader, the group, or their materials and practices. And I call this your inner red flag radar or your BS detector, also known as intuition, gut instincts, your feeling, your body responses, sensations. This is just when something feels off, right? You have that feeling of discomfort, unease, confusion. For me, I was like, wait, I'm feeling off with his teachings, but there's thousands of people who are loving it and nodding, that group think that we talked about before. It's like, something's wrong with me, right? No, I wish I would have listened to those inner red flags. Feels like something is wrong with you. Maybe you're broken, you're the problem, or I was always feeling like I was walking on eggshells. I could never be fully myself. And I was always worried about what they're going to think. Also, if you're feeling pressured to purchase, buy more products, buy more retreats, you're feeling pressured to conform, be like everybody else. It felt like we had to fit in with the cool kids at school, or pressure to commit, attend more retreats, practice more. Again, that FOMO that we talked about. And also red flag is that when you start to notice that you're losing your personal autonomy and empowerment, you're not trusting yourself. You can't critically think, for me, I couldn't even read a book anymore. I lost the logical part of my brain. I stopped questioning. I couldn't make decisions alone, having to go to the leader or the group or other people in order to run everything by them, this complete dependency. More internal red flags is when you consistently feel worse or confused after engaging. So kind of like what I said before, maybe during the meditations that you're doing with them or the practices or the retreats, you feel this high, you feel great, but then you leave, boom, crash, right? Deteriorating self-esteem, losing your sense of self, difficulties questioning, and your life, relationships is just not improving. Now, this one, the lack of credentials and relevant qualifications that Jean talked about, I put this as a yellow flag because I think it's important to look at both sides of this, because just because somebody is credentialed does not mean that they are qualified or ethical. I've heard so many horror stories of credentialed, PhD, master's level, all these people, and they're still coercive. So just because they have those credentials doesn't necessarily mean. So this is like a yellow flag where it's to pause. And for example, if they have no credentials, like the person who actually supported me through my whole recovery process, dropped out of high school, has 0 qualifications and was so amazing. And I went to a cult expert and I felt more traumatized after working with them. So again, you really need to pause, and it's contextual. It depends on the person and how you feel with them, and really looking at these red and green flags. But the other thing to keep in mind is, if they are not qualified or don't have those credentials, again, that they might not have that ethical body and that accountability. So, that could be a potential for malpractice and hard to go after them legally as well. But context really matters. So now we're going to look at the opposite side. And I think I don't see this talked about enough in the field of the green flags, because it's like, well, warning, we have to always look out. But when you kind of know the green flags of a healthy relationship, this can really help. So green flags external, when we're looking at the leader or the group, is, do they respect your individual differences, that we're all unique? We all have unique skills. We're all different in many different ways. And do they respect the context and the complexities of each person, of life? And do they trust each individual's innate intelligence? So even when somebody comes to me, they're completely traumatized, it's like you trust that there's an internal innate intelligence within them that is already empowered and knows how to heal themselves. And do they promote self-empowerment in others, empowering you to make your own decisions? And do they encourage healthy skepticism, deep thinking, critical questioning? It's like, come here. Like, we want you guys to question us and challenge this and not just believe what we're saying. I want to learn and grow. We all want to learn and grow. So you want to make sure that they truly want you to question, because they themselves want to improve and grow. And also, is that leader and group taking self-responsibility and accountability? So if we do make a mistake, maybe we slipped up today, I don't know, or said something, it's like, okay, we own up, we change that, and we want to improve ourselves. We want to improve the group. Another green flag is, again, that ethical and professional conduct. So even if there's not a maintaining governing body or any legislation to hold them accountable, are they maintaining confidentiality, that respect? Are they referring out when it's out of their scope of practice? And do they truly care about your feelings, your needs, like I talked about earlier? And do they want you truly to have that practical success in supporting you to get the transformational results? And do they have that clear, reasonable, achievable goals and taking practical steps towards that? Unlike, for example, in Bentinho's community, he is creating an enlightened civilization by 2035. I didn't even think to ask, well, how are you going to do that, right? And what's going to happen when 2035 rolls around and we're still not awakened or enlightened? So it's really about, you can have these big dreams, but how are you going to do it? Are you actually taking steps? Because when I went to the meetings, there wasn't actually steps being taken towards that goal. So now we're going to look at the internal green flags. This is, again, how you feel internally when in the presence of that group, that leader, or with those teachings. Do you feel good? Do you feel empowered? Do you feel motivated? Do you feel understood? And this is while engaging with them, and then also afterwards. And it's not to say that this is going to happen all the time. We're human, right? And when you go to therapy, if you know, right, it doesn't always feel amazing, but there's this sense of, wow, I'm changing, I'm improving, and I feel integral with myself, my values, my moral compass. And I feel like I'm being respected as an individual with my gifts, my unique values, and I feel safe to be myself. I'm in all my human messiness, my ups, my downs, and all of it. Can I feel safe to bring that forward? And do you feel encouraged? Like they want you to ask questions. They want you to offer critical feedback. And do you feel safe to share all of you, those feelings, those needs, those experiences, and they genuinely care about it? And also feeling empowered, again, like we said before, to make those decisions, that you feel that progress and you see your life, relationships, and things improving. So now, why do we overlook these red flags? I'm doing my dissertation now. I just led a bunch of focus groups, and they always say, oh man, retrospectively, like I knew all these red flags. Like, why does that happen? Why is it really hard to see it in the moment? Well, a lot of times it's that covert coercion and manipulation. It's, I think as we're getting more educated, they have to find more sophisticated and covert tactics to kind of cover it up. Cialdini's principles of influence, like Jennifer talked about, could be at play. And we are so conditioned, right? Growing up, conditioned to believe and trust authority, whether that be from your parents to follow your parents' orders, or your teachers at school, or the pastors at church, and we're kind of conditioned to fawn and be nice and be good people. We want to be good people, and not ask too many questions and be polite and don't criticize, don't cause conflict. Right. And I think a part of us, we want to see the best in people. We want to trust. And I know what put me in trouble is giving people the benefit of the doubt, or seeing their potential and just waiting and hoping one day they're going to step into that, or thinking that other people have good intentions, maybe like you do, unaware of their hidden agendas. And we start to justify their words, actions, and behaviors. Also, red flags can be overlooked because maybe you grew up in an unhealthy family dynamic, or had a narcissistic parent, or intimate relationship, or with groups, or maybe you lacked healthy relationships. I think that was the key, is I never realized I didn't have a healthy, intimate relationship to actually be able to compare that to and see the contrast of what is possible. So another one is, Jennifer already talked about this, that confirmation bias, the tendency to pay attention to information that confirms our beliefs and ignore whatever challenges them. Another one is cognitive dissonance. So this is that when people hold two contradictory beliefs at the same time, our brain does not like that. So for example, if followers respect their self-help leader, they may make excuses or rationalize the harmful behavior to align it to the positive feelings for that person or group. So like I said, I had put Bentinho on this pedestal. So when Brent committed suicide, my brain couldn't hold those contradictions. Like the man that I think is enlightened and going to save humanity, he could not have caused that. That must have been another outside thing. My brain could not process it. Jennifer already talked about this, that group think, and also sunk cost fallacy. And this is the belief that one must continue with a situation because of the time, the energy, the resources, everything that they've invested despite all the red flags. So for example, maybe you invested 10K into a self-help program and 10 years of your life, and you've dedicated all your time and energy. It's like, there's no way that your mind's going to want to say, this is all bullshit. It's really hard. So then we keep investing and keep hoping that maybe one day I'll get some benefit out of this. And it's really hard to cut the losses, and again, I think it's really important to be compassionate with ourselves, that it is really hard. It's just how our brains are wired. And the more I learn about psychology, it's like, oh, of course, I wasn't unable to see the red flags and really listen to them. But I think this education and awareness is really helping. So it's hard to see when you're in it, and it's a lot easier to see retrospectively. And if you're interested, I have a red flag checklist also for relationships, and a cult recovery guide that you can download, calliesorensen.com. And if you don't want to download it, you can email me and I'll give it to you for free. But you can do that. And also if you message me, I have the feelings and needs list as well. And remember, trust yourself. No one knows you better than you. So pay attention to those gut feelings. No matter how good something looks, if it doesn't feel right, trust yourself. Even if there's thousands of other people saying otherwise, trust yourself and walk away. And Jennifer.